All right, Jack. Before we start, your name is Jack. My name is Jackass. Uh, we're gonna make sure the
It
sound
depends on the day.
depends on the day, as in yesterday. So we have our wives on duty, and they're gonna make sure we're good to go with the sound that they can hear you and me. Do we have any good news? Let's see here. I think they're still waiting for it to go live. I'll do a little check on mine.
All right, I'm gonna adjust my lighting here because
All
it's.
right. We are good. You good on your end too? All right, I can hear him on my end. All right, so Jack, I just checked on. I have my little side assistant right here. Well, they can see it, and I could hear your voice. If for whatever reason it doesn't go, we're cursed, and I'm sorry for wasting your time a second time.
Well, sorry. I'm happy to be here, bud.
I appreciate it, man. So, Jack, thank you so much for coming on. Let them know your full name and somewhat of what you do, so they can understand your expertise.
Full name is John TurnBull, John Grayson TurnBull III. Our firm is TurnBull Brockmeyer Law Group in Towson. We've been practicing there for 20 years. My law partner is also my wife, Adele Brockmeyer, and her father practiced law in the city for, damn near 60 years. He's right at St. Paul and Center, where St. Paul Street splits, building there, and we've recently assumed management of that, or Adele's sort of the managing partner there. So we're juggling two firms. We do civil litigation, medical malpractice, workers' compensation, personal injury, car accidents. I was known and am known as a criminal defense litigator, but we've over the last decade really sort of diversified our practice. Adele is a family law lawyer, custody, visitation, divorce. We like to think of ourselves as sort of a one-stop shop, and we can handle just about any case for, family sort of working class type people. We're not corporate lawyers. We represent the little guy, the underdog. And if we aren't the people who can handle your case, we know who the people are that should handle your case, and we like to make those referrals.
You see,
So that's kind of us in a nutshell.
that type of intro makes me want to go commit a crime, because I know
Well,
just who to go to if I need to.
or you could go get into a car accident. That would be fine instead of committing a crime,
There we go. You know what?
Medical mistake, maybe.
Yeah, let's bring it down some. Like, you don't gotta go all the way to first degree anything. So yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for reaching out and for coming on. And hopefully after today, we'll have you on many times to discuss
Looking forward
stuff
to
that
it.
outside of my scope. So we're gonna touch on a few topics. We're gonna save number 6 for number 6. Even though it's hot in the media right now, I really want to touch on some of the other things we were talking about the other day before the audio had that whole issue going on. So
You don't have to tell people we made mistakes yesterday and
you
that
know
our
what?
audio
I
is
gotta you
cooking.
know, I gotta stop doing that. Now, I'm so transparent with this show. I like to tell them, like, when I have gas, I'm like, hey, my stomach doesn't hurt. But sometimes
Right.
you don't want to break that fourth wall and let them know anything. So I'll work on that.
Well, full disclosure, I did shower today. So, a lot of people in COVID, shower becomes a low priority, but I've showered everything.
Good man, and you got a haircut. So maybe
And I got a haircut today, too.
Lovely. So we have 6 questions total. Number 1, I wanted to start off with regarding employees, especially essential workers, returning to work or participating in any activity. Can they refuse the order to work if they're not equipped with sufficient PPE? And what if they refuse to work until the vaccine is available? Can they be fired, especially if they have underlying medical conditions? So that's pretty much a nice Big Mac of a question, but
Sure. Just to kind of break it down, in general, forget COVID for a second, put all that aside. If there's an unsafe working condition, certainly OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and there's a Maryland equivalent, MOSHA, Maryland Occupational Safety and Health. They could step in, and the questions are, there's a 4-part test as to whether or not the employer is acting reasonable, whether there's an unsafe condition, whether it's been properly addressed, and whether the employee's refusal to work is unreasonable. And, we are sort of living in uncharted waters, or navigating uncharted waters right now. And I think unfortunately, as we have discussed, there are no bright line rules in most of the law. What's reasonable and what is reasonable care? when I'm driving down the road and you're coming the other way, I have to use reasonable care to not cross the double yellow line and hit you. When you own a business or a premises, you have to have reasonable care, use reasonable care so someone doesn't fall down the stairs if you have a broken step, for example. So I think in this position, if a case ever got to court, what would a court be looking at? Well, we would be looking at, number one, was the employee's assessment or was their fear of this risk, was it reasonable? And number two, and more importantly, because I think right now people are going to side, especially with small businesses. Now, it may be a different analysis with a big hospital, nursing homes, these big conglomerates. But right now, I think the idea is going to be to protect the businesses. And the question a court would ultimately have to resolve, a judge or a jury, is, did the business take reasonable precautions? Was it reasonable under the circumstances? Can you protect against every possible risk? No, no one can protect against every possible risk. But if you quit your job, I mean, and this had a sort of two prongs. Number one, let's look at it from the unemployment aspect. If you quit your job because, you know, they threw open the doors, they're not giving us masks, they're not giving us wipes, they're not giving us hand sanitizer, and they're just letting every Tom, Dick, and Harry come in, and you quit your job and say, I felt like I had no choice but to quit. It was basically what we would call a constructive discharge. Any reasonable person would not want to continue working there. Unemployment might say, well, the conditions were such that the employer was not acting reasonably and the employee did not voluntarily quit their position. The second sort of issue to look at is wrongful discharge. Would I have a lawsuit against my employer for wrongful discharge? Couple things on that topic. Number one, wrongful discharge requires you to show that the employer fired you for cause and should not have fired you for cause. As we probably all know, or many of your viewers know, you can't fire someone if they're an at-will employee if the basis is race, color, creed, religion, sexual orientation, all those protected classes. Fire me for one of those reasons, I would have a suit against you automatically in state or federal court for wrongful discharge. Okay. If you're an at-will employee, let's say I work at an office building and they take no precautions whatsoever, and I refuse to come to work, they could fire me. And if I'm an at-will employee, a non-contractual employee, we're really probably talking about nothing, because an at-will employee can be fired for any reason except those reasons, those protected reasons of race, color, creed, religion, sexual orientation, et cetera. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think probably and this is a big topic, there's law review articles that are coming out, law commentators are talking about that. Here's the other aspect of employment or any kind of civil law. You always have a duty to mitigate your damages. So if I'm working at that office building and I'm fired because they're not taking reasonable precautions, as we joked about the other day, I can't sit on my couch and watch The Price is Right and Maury Povich for the next 3 years while I wait for the case to get to court. I've got to go try. The law imposes a duty upon me to try to replace those wages. So if I get a better job in a month or 2 months, or the same job, or maybe not quite as good a job, I'm not going to have a lot of damages, because your damages are really measured by your lost wages. So employment law is difficult in the arena of wrongful discharge, because you have that duty to mitigate your damages. You can't, again, sit on the couch and eat potato chips and wait for the case to get to court for the big payday. So again, I realize that, you know, as human beings in today's world, we crave definitive answers. We'll just Google it and we'll find the answer. Well, the answer is who was reasonable under the circumstances? Was the employer reasonable and taking reasonable precautions, or was the employee reasonable and the employer was not taking reasonable precautions? So I know that doesn't answer your question, but that's the way the law is sometimes.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand. And I think it even applies to what we were talking about yesterday, for those instances where people have underlying pre-existing medical conditions. If the employer, but reasonably try to make an effort to accommodate their needs versus not doing so, and going from there as far as who's at fault. So it's a lot to chew on, but you definitely gave us, you know, plenty.
Well,
For
I had a
leftovers.
client yesterday. He's a longtime client. He is a small business owner. His daughter works at a local hospital, and she's like, I don't want to go into work because I'm really scared. I mean, she's like 22 or 23, and she's a nursing assistant, and she's like, I am terrified to go to work. And I'm on the phone with her and her dad, and I said, Dave, like, I got two answers for you. As a dad, there's no way I'm letting her go back to work. Okay. As a lawyer, I'm telling you, she should probably go back to work, because if they are taking reasonable precautions, she's gonna lose her job.
Wow. Well, that sucks because someone in your position, you understands both sides of the coin.
I mean, I try to. I think that, that you've
Like
got to
you're
always
dead.
take the other side's position into account.
Right.
It's like the offense has got to study what the defense is doing.
Yeah. Man. Okay. Question number 2. What legal protection or protections are available for renters, homeowners, or commercial renters if they're unable to pay their rent or mortgage due to loss of wages related to the pandemic?
Okay, right now there's a stay, or some people call it a moratorium, but that's really not the right word. There's a stay on legal proceedings right now for both residential and commercial evictions for non-payment of rent. As a practical matter, I think there's a stay on all. I mean, you could probably, if you're running a brothel out of your business, you could probably institute an eviction proceeding, but the court isn't going to hear it for a couple months anyway, because the court system, except for extreme emergency matters, is effectively shut down until June 8th. And after June 8th, it's going to be reopened incrementally. So for all intents and purposes, there is a stay on really any eviction for any reason, both commercial and residential. Going back to sort of knowing both sides of the coin and taking all sides into account, bigger rental companies are probably going to want to get paid a lot quicker than the smaller. I own a rental house, and I have a rental property, or I own a condo and I own a rental property. Those people are probably in a position where they don't want to kick their tenant out if they've been a good tenant, and they don't want to lose the rent and try to find somebody new. I would probably advise, and I have advised a couple clients so far that have called me on this issue, is to try to negotiate. Go to the landlord and say, look, I like having my business here. I love living here, whatever the case may be. Can we add a little, once I'm back to work now, or I'm going to be back to work in July, can I add a little bit to my rent every month to make up that difference that I couldn't pay you for June, or I couldn't pay you for May? Most landlords, I haven't heard back from a couple of the clients, but I've heard back from others that said, my landlord has agreed to let me pay an extra $100 a month for the next year, my lease, to try to make up that time. And if, I come into some money or some overtime, I'll be able to pay it. And most people have been affected in some way by this. There's very few people out there, but, as you pointed out yesterday, everybody's paying up the chain. So somebody's got to pay somebody. The guy who owns the house is a rental property. He's got a bank to pay, and a bank has shareholders that they have to be responsible to. So everyone's paying up the line, and everyone's been affected. And I think people have been largely pretty decent. I actually talked to a landlord on behalf of one client. He's like, look, I'm open to suggestions as far as what we can negotiate.
Cool.
So, short of going to court, because there is going to come a day if you decide not to pay your rent or you can't pay your rent, there's going to come a day in August or September, October, where you're going to find yourself in rent court facing eviction. So if you can negotiate something now, you're going to be much better off.
Wonderful.
In my opinion.
Wonderful. You heard it from Jack himself. This is the time to not pay your rent. Okay, question number. That's not what Jack said. Please listen to the entire question and his answer.
I think I should have like a little disclaimer that runs across the bottom. When Nick interprets what I say, it's not necessarily Jack's opinion.
Exactly. Jack and the jackass. That's what we'll go with.
All right.
All right. So question number 3. Can someone request workman's compensation? Oh, come on with the dog. Sorry about that. Can someone request?
I'm sorry. My daughter's in the next room baking a cake, so if you hear some pots clanging. And
No
I might be
worries.
10 pounds heavier next time we talk.
That's
So
even better.
we're all good.
That's called happy living. Can someone request workman's compensation if they were to get infected with COVID-19 while on the job, resulting in irreversible damage to their health, preventing them from working in the future?
Okay. First, 2-minute primer on workers' compensation. Okay. What it is, what it isn't. Workers' compensation has three main areas. Okay. Number one, I get hurt at work. I carry 50-pound bags of rocks all day, and that's my job. I trip, I hurt my back, and I go through physical therapy. First thing the employer and employees are interested in is, am I going to get paid my wages while I'm off, while I'm out of work? So yes, workers' comp, first area, lost wages. Second area workers' comp covers is your medical expenses. Anything that's causally related to the accident, my hurt back from tripping in the warehouse, yes, they have to pay anything related to that incident. If it's something pre-existing or something that happens after, the employer does not have to pay for that. The third area of workers' compensation, and this is the one the lawyers like because this is how we get paid, is permanency. So let me give you a very quick example. I work in a warehouse, I trip and fall, I hurt my back, and my job all day is the worst job in the world. I carry 50-pound bags of sand all day long back and forth in the warehouse. So at some point, I would send me, or I would send the client to a doctor for a disability rating. And the doctor might say, you have a 20% permanent partial disability in your back, okay? A permanent disability rating in your back of 20%. Okay, well, how's that translate? Well, what that translate is maybe I can't carry 50-pound bags anymore. I can only carry 40-pound bags, hence the 20% loss of industrial capacity. Or I can work 8 hours, or I can work carrying those 50-pound bags, but I can only do it for, I can only do it for 6 hours a day. So, roughly a 20% drop off. So that's the three sort of phases of workers' comp. Now, that brings up an interesting issue when you apply it to COVID. The first big issue we're having, and I do have several nurses that work in nursing homes who we all know that there's like 6 or 7 of them infected from the same nursing home. Their supervisor got it and like 25 residents got it. So we all know that they got it working there. Now, the insurance company for the employer is going to say, how do we know they didn't get it at Home Depot when they went to go get a bag of mulch? Or how do we know they didn't get it at Costco's or Sam's when they went to go get, toilet paper and hand sanitizer? We don't know. So the big issue is the word causation. How do we know that this injury was caused at work? Well, we don't know for sure, but there's going to be some studies that they call contact tracing. I don't know if you've read anything about that. And most of these girls or these young ladies' doctors are willing to put in writing that they believe to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that it was contracted at work. Well, that's all I need. Remember, in civil law, it's 51% to 49%. You tip that scale just 51% to 49%, you can win. It's not criminal law where it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and that burden of proof is much wider. It's only, more likely so than not so, 51% to 49%. So if I have a letter from a doctor that says, in my opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the COVID was contracted at work, that sort of gets me over that hump of causation. So the employee would be entitled to lost wages while they're out. And a lot of these hospitals and nursing homes, as a footnote, are making these girls go home and take their vacation time and sick time. I have one client that's going to go back to work with a deficit of vacation and sick time. She's going to be in the negative when she gets back to work in August, but that's, it really irritates me when these big, and this is one of these big corporate conglomerate nursing home places that's got places all over the country. They print money in the basement of these places, and they're going to make this poor girl who makes a living wage basically, and a couple kids at home, they're going to make her take her vacation and sick time to the point of a deficit. But anyway, so when she's off, I'm hoping that we can recoup some money for the I think they put her out for 6 weeks. I want to be able to recoup those lost wages for that time. I want all her medical expenses to be paid. But then we get to that permanency. Is there a permanent injury with respect to COVID? And the answer is we don't know yet.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it out.
I've read some medical journals. I've read some studies. There's respiratory issues. There can be brainstem issues, nervous system issues. It's really going to depend on how bad you had it. We don't know what the long-term effects are. So in a lot of these cases, we're going to get those lost wages. We're going to get those medical expenses paid. And then we're going to let these cases sit for 9 months to 12 months and see how the client reacts. And the client's going to go to the doctor, every 60 days and get checked out and make sure that their respiratory system is okay. So that third phase, that permanency phase where we talked about where the guy has the 20% permanent disability in his back, we don't know if this young lady is going to have a 10 or 20 or 50% lung capacity reduction, some type of, we just don't know. So the science is not quite there yet. And again, and I know I say this all the time, it all depends really in whether or not the cases are worth money to the client and hence, possibly to the lawyers. So again, all us lawyers, we're all on listservs together. We all email. We have these sort of blogs and group chats, and we just don't know what's going to happen. And we're going to kind of get in the canoe and paddle downstream and see what's around the corner.
Yeah, this is definitely an evolving situation, but that's interesting, man. Even the comment you made about them dipping into our vacation and sick time to the point that it's going to be it's like we're all dealing with this. Like, isn't it? I guess maybe some of these companies, if you're trying to be somewhat looking at it from their point of view, they maybe didn't have in place any kind of, contingency plan to say, okay, if this happens, what can we do so we don't deal with this pile, but allocate our resources to take care of these people with this stuff. I don't know, but it sucks when we have to bear it, and it feels like, it's not always the top that has.
Well, I mean, the big joke is, you hear the jingles, Nationwide is on your side, you're in good hands with Allstate, State Farm, I forget what theirs is, but it's a crock. Nationwide is not on your side, and you're not in State. Their job is to make money for their shareholders. Their job is not to be on your side and be in their good hands. So, the workers' comp insurers are the same way. Their job is to not make sure that the injured worker is taken care of. Because if they did take care of anyone, no one would need a workers' compensation lawyer. If the insurance companies took care of everyone who was in a car accident or had a medical malpractice issue, no one would need lawyers. Now, some people would prefer a world like that, but I certainly wouldn't, and would not get paid what they were deserved if that were the case. So,
look at that. We got a theme song, Nationwide, not on your side. I like it. We should run with that. I think they'll like that if we pitch it to them. Question number 4.
I have a strange feeling that they might reject that idea.
I think so too. I think it doesn't go well with the brand. Question number 4, one of my favorite questions that we talked about yesterday, because I have a background in martial arts. I'm a kung fu master. Is coughing on someone claiming to have COVID considered assault, like a bio-terroristic threat? And are we allowed to defend ourselves from said assault?
Well, first, let me start with this as a little background. There is a statute in Maryland that makes it a crime to knowingly transmit HIV to another person. Now, COVID is not going to get into the Maryland code in that way, but by way of analogy, I think courts and prosecutors would take it very seriously if I know I have COVID, and even if it's a joke or you're horsing around with your buddies or it's a complete stranger. I mean, there are a lot of kooks out there.
Yes.
I told you yesterday about the ladies down in Lansdowne that had a bleach fight in Walmart.
That's too funny.
And like the hazmat team had to get called in. So people do, let's be honest, people do crazy things. Yeah. All you got to do is read the Sun paper to see that people do crazy things. And I wouldn't be shocked. I think actually my wife, she does all our social media, by the way. I just want to give a shout out to her. Adele does all our Facebook, all our Instagram, and she's always posting these crazy articles. And really, the crazier they are, the more shares we get and the more likes we get. And I think a guy was coughing on vegetables at a grocery store, like a Safeway or an Aldi or something like that. And the guy like said he had COVID. Well, they had to like clear out all the vegetables and all
Right.
the
I think I
fruits and
remember
like
that.
throw everything away. So I believe your question's not crazy because there are so many nuts out there. And so what charge, if I were a police officer or a district court commissioner and I had poor Nick Austin dragged in here by 3 cops saying, Nick coughed on people and he's got COVID. What would I charge him with? Well, first thing I would start with is assault, because I think it's definitely an assault. Even though you don't have to remember, you don't have to physically touch someone to assault. The classic example is pointing a gun at someone. You've not made any physical contact with them, but you're putting them in fear of bodily harm. Okay. So that's what an assault is, not just the physical touching, but putting someone in fear of bodily harm, of serious bodily harm. And I think that that's the analogy that I would use if I were prosecuting a case like that. Now, I don't prosecute cases, but if I were arguing as to why someone should be charged, I would think that fear of bodily harm would be an analogy. I think also an analogy would be reckless endangerment. Driving down the highway 100 miles an hour, driving down York Road or Liberty Road 100 miles an hour, weaving in and out of traffic, you are recklessly endangering the other people on the road and the pedestrians, even though you haven't made physical contact with them. It's sort of a reckless, wanton disregard for human life. So if I were the charging fairy, I would probably charge these guys with reckless endangerment and assault. As to your question as to whether you can use self-defense, well, self-defense is, remember the underlying theory of self-defense is that you have a right to self-defense as long as your response is reasonable. So let's use 2 quick examples. Let's say I have the only client in 20 years that's ever been dissatisfied with me. There aren't any, but just in case, just for my example, we'll say there's one. And he keeps calling me and telling my secretaries he's going to beat me up and he's going to see me in a dark alley one night. And I walk out the door late at night because I'm working late on Nick's case, doing as much as I can for him. And I walk out into the parking lot and he just pops up right in front of me and says, "I'm going to beat you up." And well, I would certainly have a right to use considerable force, certainly with my hands, maybe more if he has a weapon. But under the same example, if I throw open my back door at 7 o'clock at night in my office and he's standing 50 feet away in the parking lot, I can't pull out a gun and shoot him. That's
Right.
not a reasonable response to the perceived threat. Okay. So in your example, and I can tell, Nick, that what you're asking me is if someone coughs on me, I want to beat his ass.
I want to beat his ass.
Because I've seen videos online. You have these videos of you like punching these bags and sparring. And I knew when I first checked you out and stalked you on Facebook that I was definitely not going to say anything to make you mad, because I think my 14-year-old daughter could probably beat me up.
That's
But that being said, Nick wants to know if this dude spits on me or coughs on me and I know he's got COVID, can I beat his ass? And the answer is a little bit.
a little bit. Okay.
You could possibly, you could certainly push him away. You might even get away with a punch. But if you really give him what he probably deserved, would probably go too far. Your response has got to be reasonable. You can't take it too far. Can't bring a gun to a knife fight is the old analogy. Which is not necessarily true. It's not a great analogy because you probably can bring a gun to a knife fight, but you can't bring a gun to a fist fight.
I dig it.
So, I'm going to ask you to use as much restraint as humanly possible if ever faced with that circumstance. If not, keep one of my cards in your shirt pocket.
I might do that either way, but yeah, no, that's good to know because sometimes these are dark times and you got to find humor in it. Just to get through. And a lot of times at the gym, we come up with these hypothetical situations. And one of them was just that. If someone was to play around and do that, what could I do to protect myself and my family? And now I know I can at least hit them with a quick 1-2. I'm not going to ground and pound them like a UFC fighter into a mat. But if I have to hit you with a long kick to the chest just to get you away and warn you not to do it again, I think we can make that work, huh, Jack?
I mean, you could probably get away with even just one good throat punch probably would get you through. I always tell my daughter, if you ever, ever in a bad situation,
Okay.
you go through the throat or the eyes, and if
Yes.
they keep coming, you better turn and run.
I like it. Or, which always kills me in these damn horror movies, if you shoot him once in the chest, shoot him 30 more times in the head. Don't just walk off and, he's always alive. Shoot him 30 more times in the head. Reload, shoot him again. And then kick him in the throat or the nuts. Either one.
I remember I had a teacher in high school. He always used to say he grew up in like the 50s when like I don't know, I guess fist fights were sort of more the thing back then. You meet behind the malt shop for the fist fight. Kind of reminds me of a Barry Levinson movie. But he always said if you hit someone square in the face and you break their nose and he gets up and keeps coming, you should run because there's nothing more painful than a broken nose.
True indeed. That's sound advice. Sound advice. So our final question is something that is a hot topic right now, and unfortunately, it resulted in another person dying. And I wanted to get your opinion on it, especially your legal opinion on it. And it's regarding Minnesota resident George Floyd, who was also the brother of a basketball player. I forgot the gentleman's name, but when I was looking at his photo, he looked familiar. He has a twin brother who was I think a Minnesota. Is it Minnesota Twins? What's the name of that? Timberwolves.
Timberwolves.
Was actually his twin brother. That's neither here or there. I just threw that in there. But as we know, there was he died, and it looks like he was underneath police restraint, some kind of legal hold or stance, and he pretty much died on camera. My question to you is, what, if any, is there any kind of criminal and/or civil case that could possibly be applied to this situation for the sake of the family and his loved ones and the community at large?
I mean, I'm sure you've seen the video.
Well, actually, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it?
I can't stomach it, man.
It is disgusting. It is. I mean, I told myself I wasn't going to cuss on the first time on the air with you, and I really want to describe what I think about what this police officer did. I mean, it is the most callous, uncaring, the opposite of protect and serve that you've ever seen in your life. There is no, I mean, I've defended police officers in court. I've completely attacked and stripped bare police officers who I felt like did the wrong thing. Look, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. I don't care if you're a plumber or a cop or whatever or a rocket scientist like you. At the end of the day, we're all humans and we all make mistakes. But when those mistakes cost people their lives, there is no reasonable protocol in any police training manual for what he did. So they're not going to be able to rely on that justification. A lot of these cases come down to training. The name escapes me right now, but the gentleman that was placed in the chokehold in New York, and Eric, I can't remember it. I should have done my homework a little better. But anyway, the bottom line is that sort of chokehold, it is not a valid police training technique. It is not a valid restraint. What this cop did to this poor guy, I mean, literally, Nick, if you haven't seen it, I'm actually telling you not to watch it. Okay. It is like, it evoked such a visceral response in me that, like, I just couldn't believe that someone could be so callous to human lives. And if you are that callous, you don't deserve to be out there with a gun and a badge, purportedly protecting people. And it was like a forgery or like a bad check case. This dude wasn't like a murderer or rapist. Yeah. He was like a petty thief at worst, who was trying to maybe pass a bad check. But even I could probably make a really good argument that even someone who was suspected of a much worse crime doesn't deserve to be, basically he suffocated him with his knee. Right there, and he's screaming, I can't breathe. All the bystanders are saying, hey man, you're choking him out. He's dying. But my emotional response aside, as lawyers often do, we have to sort of put that. I always use the analogy. How old are you, Nick?
I am 35.
Okay. Did you ever watch Star Trek when you were little?
I did.
So the original with like, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. Did you ever see the old reruns?
That was a show then? I thought that was a.
No, man, that was like a real live show.
I thought that was like a commercial of an old show.
That was back when we had 3 channels. It was 2, 11, and 13.
remember
And then
those.
if you were lucky and you held the aerial just right, you could get 45 and watch Captain Chesapeake.
I came when 45 was a little easier to get, as you can
Right.
tell. But,
Okay. So Captain Kirk is the emotional, hot-blooded captain of the ship, and Mr. Spock is the sort of like calm, cool, collective, unemotional thinker. And sometimes as lawyers, that's what we have to do. We have to sort of put emotion aside, and be that, so I always joke that, do I want to be Captain Kirk today, or do I need to be Mr. Spock today? Do I need to get up in front of a judge and make this warm, emotional, impassioned speech, or do I need to stick just to the logic? So you've already heard the Captain Kirk, and now I'm going to give you the Mr. Spock. And the Mr. Spock is that I would bet every penny that I have and will ever make on the fact that this officer is going to be indicted for second-degree murder. I would bet every penny that I have that the officers that stood by and watched him do it, at the very least, are going to be indicted for aiding and abetting him, or at the very least, malfeasance in office for not stopping him. The family's going to have a huge claim in state court for wrongful death. They would have a federal, they would have what we call a USC claim, a violation of his human rights, a violation of his constitutional rights, either of which will probably never see the inside of a courtroom, because you'd be crazy to take that case in front of a jury. But the money is never going to repay the family or his children. I mean, it's just. And the other thing that really upsets me about this is, we have, I don't care how you feel about the police, 80% of the world out there, most of their interaction with the police is positive. Okay. But there's 20% that their interaction, the police officer comes and, gets the, they help out the community caretaking function. They break up fights. They protect small businesses. They separate the domestic violence victims from their abusers. They do good work. Okay. But there is a segment of police officers like this guy that make all the rest of the guys look bad. I hunt and fish with police officers. I've defended police officers charged with crimes in court. I have a saying that I always say, and I stole it from a judge in circuit court, Judge Enzer, and she's just like, very few human beings are all good or all bad. And I have a hard time watching this video and thinking that this dude has much good in him. It's horrifying what we saw. But I mean, as far as criminal charges go, I mean, this guy's looking at a multi-decade, if not more, sentence. If not, I mean, he's looking up in the video almost like he knows what he's doing and like is enjoying the people watching him do this. His defense is going to be, this was not an intentional act. This was not the intended consequence of my actions. In Maryland, you could, even if the jury believed that this was not an intended consequence, there's a thing in Maryland law, a tenet of Maryland law. It's called depraved heart murder. Do you remember the case in Randallstown? It was probably 10 or 15 years ago, where a couple of guys shot into a group of people after a football game.
Yes, I do.
And someone was paralyzed.
Yeah, so the gentleman went to my high school, Owings Mills High School. I do remember that. Yeah.
The shooter or the victim?
The shooter, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was convicted of second-degree murder under the theory of depraved heart murder. In other words, even though he didn't intend to kill his victim, his actions were so reckless and so far beyond what a reasonable human being would do that it's considered, and it's kind of an antiquated term, but it's depraved heart. You're so depraved and so callous to to human life that it raises what could be manslaughter up to second-degree murder. Pat Kavanaugh, when he sentenced him, I think he gave the guy like a life sentence plus 100 years. And he said, if I could give you another 100, I probably would. But I think he was capped out at that. So that's an example of someone who acts with such a depraved heart and such a callous disregard for human life,
Right.
that, you can be convicted of second-degree murder. But, we were having so much fun and laughing and joking, and now we're ending on such a bummer term that I think you need to like tell a joke, something like that, to make us all.
Well, I tell you what, just to back up what you were saying, I have many friends in law enforcement or first responders, EMT, firefighters, stuff like that. And unfortunately, in all communities, and that's irrespective of race, religion, culture, there's always, it seems, that 10 or 20% of jackasses are magnified to the point where they become a representation of the entire group. And police officers aren't outside of that understanding as well. So I do want to reiterate, I'm not bashing police officers, but it's definitely a system type of thing that we have to address. Maybe it's training, maybe it's just a culture change. I don't know what it is, but it's unfortunate that yet again something like this happens. But more importantly, there are people out there who are going to fight the good fight, and there are people like you who come on the show to help us remove emotion from Mr. Spock versus, what was the other old guy you were talking about? It was another
Captain Kirk.
Captain. There it is, the original.
All right, you got to go on Netflix and try to find some Star Trek reruns.
I think I owe you that.
And that's actually a great idea for another show, because, some of the problems we have are so overwhelming, it's unbelievable. And Adele, her solution, and I think it's a good one. She's like, in the most at-risk areas, in parts of Baltimore County and in Baltimore City, that there needs to be year-round school. We do a lot of work and charity work in the city. We're involved with a lot of charities, and a lot of these older guys, these mentor guys that run these charities, say if the streets get them before they're like 8 or 10 years old, they're gone forever. He's like, so I got to get to them before. He's like, it used to be most people think that a 14 or 15-year-old is fine until he starts hanging out with the gangs. He's like, no. It's like 8 years old, 10 years old. Once the great gangs get them, they're done. So maybe sometime you can have maybe a few other people on. We can do a group, sort of counterpoint as to how we're going to save our beloved Baltimore.
I would love it. And that's from a micro point of view. From a macro, save the world. And I think it starts with us in our individual community. So that sounds like a great idea. Anything else you want to throw out there? What's your favorite thing to do during the COVID quarantine pandemic? What are you guys doing to keep sane?
We've been doing a lot of eating. We're actually working full time. Okay. We're busy because we do a lot of civil work, and a lot of that's done outside the courtroom. So we are busy. My son and I have been going up to the Gunpowder River, catching some trout, cooking up some trout.
Nice.
An exciting trip to Costco or Aldi. If you do you go to Aldi?
Yes, I did. I did. The one in Lock Raven.
The junk aisle in Aldi? They call it the aisle of shame. It's got all the junk in it that you really don't need, but somehow you can't resist.
Yes. Like they'll sell everything in it.
Right,
not even
exactly.
Food related.
Like flip flops, like plant holders.
It's the Walmart aisle.
That's my wife's favorite thing in the world, to go down the aisle of shame in Aldi, and that's like our date night. If back when things were normal, she's like, just go down the aisle of shame with me, and don't say a word when I put stuff in the cart. And that's like the most romantic thing you can do for me.
How long have you guys been together?
We've actually known each other since like she was 16 and I was 19. Now we haven't been together that long.
Right.
We sort of off and on, and then we got married in 2002, and so we've been married for 18 years and practicing law together for 17 years. So when you add those all together, it's like being together for 35 years.
Look at that. So yeah, I asked that question because I've been married now for 3 years, and I've known my wife for almost 10. I think it's 10. Hopefully I got that number right, or I'm getting my ass kicked. But those date nights are important, and I feel like the longer we're in a relationship, it's simple shit like that. Like, just go down the forgotten items aisle and just have a ball and let me enjoy myself. Or in her case, it's candles.
Resist every urge to say, well, we don't need that in our house.
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard. Yes.
As soon as she comes downstairs when we're done, she knows she's going to tear into me and be like, don't you talk about the aisle of shame, bad.
She is. That's your ass. She definitely is. Jack, man, I really appreciate you coming on. Number one, a second time, because the first time we did all this and all the audio was lost. So I really
That
appreciate
was
you
just
taking.
our dry run. I think we did much better this time.
Hey, listen, you got a haircut now, so
Yeah.
that's just already that much better, right? And I would love to have you on in the future. Most importantly, I really mean this candidly. You're good at this. I would watch you if you had maybe like a weekly thing that like a lawyer update. It's plenty of hot topics you can touch on. If you just follow the trail of the president, you'll find something to touch on that has some kind of legal basis. But I think you have what it takes to do this. You know, get your nice little ring light set up. I can help you with any kind of logistical stuff you need to do it. But I think a weekly check-in, depending on your schedule, bi-weekly check-in, even if you have guests on and they talk about certain stuff, you have a gift of gab and you have an expertise that I think is very valuable to communities at large. So I challenge you to
When's
maybe
the
jump to
stripper show? You said you have strippers on once in a while. When's that show?
We'll make a goddamn show real soon if you want to come be a part of you know what's so
That's
funny?
my ass again when she comes downstairs, by the way.
Jack, I'm trying to get you out of trouble. And he's right back. Hey, honey, that's Jack. I didn't say any of that shit in case you're listening. You know what we did have, before I let you go, we had a exotic dancer named Luscious Kisses. Really, really cool. But one of the things she was talking about is forming a stripper union. Because they have a thing called Stripper Bowl they hold every year in Atlanta, I believe, where all the famous rappers, athletes, and stuff, they come together. And then at the same time, coincidentally, all the strippers around the nation come together, and they expect to get paid for their services. Well, a lot of times, these promoters and or club owners are sharks. So they'll have them come dance and collect $1 million and pay out maybe a tenth of it. So she, along with a few other exotic dancers, are trying to come together and form this like stripper or professional, what was it, adult entertainment union or something to protect those people in these situations. So maybe if we have her on back again, we can have you on to talk about some of the legalities of it all and if it's actually a thing that he could pull off.
Or you and I could just stick to safe topics that won't get us in trouble.
That works too. I like that too. Jack, thank you so much, man. We'll talk soon.
All right, hit me up with the text and we'll do something next week too. We'll come up with some more topics because a lot of this stuff we're talking about is sort of the ball's rolling and gathering. The stone is gathering moss as we're sitting here, and things might be different. Like the governor opened stuff up today, like pools,
right,
rec councils, all that stuff's opening up. That's going to create a whole nother ball of wax. Like are you, as a parent, are you going to sign a waiver with Towson Town Lacrosse that says if my kid catches COVID, I'm not going to sue the rec council?
Right. Ooh. Slippery slope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So hit me up with the text and we'll get together next week too.
Thank you, Jack. Before you sign off, how can they reach you? Where can they reach you if they need any kind of services?
Right now, the best way to get us is by cell phone, and that's 410-804-5034. And also email address. And if you post this, Nick, I'm going to ask you to put my email address up as well. And I have a footer that I can send you. If you post this at the end, you can just put up a contact.
Yeah, sounds good. So it's live right now. I'm going to be making clips to post throughout the week. But anything you want me to include inside the actual post, any kind of literature, let me know and I'll slide it right in there.
And we're in the book. If you Google John TurnBull lawyer, it comes up 50 different ways. So nice. You can find us.
Thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate you.
Have a good night, buddy.
See ya.
Take care.
Bye-bye. All right, guys. That was it. Hope you enjoyed it. Your fucks. I'll be making clips. I hope it's not. I hear echo in my ear. Maybe it's not. But yeah, I'll be making clips and posting them. And you heard Jack, man. Hopefully we'll have him on a much more regular basis. If you have any kind of questions or concerns that you wanted me to run by him, let me know. We'll definitely include it the next time. Love you. Oh, it's not safe for ears, motherfucker. Eat ass. Maybe I shouldn't. Yeah, I should be. Have a good day. Have a good life. And we're